Hey guys, Stevie Super. Today I'm going to show you how to take a 2D photo and turn it into a slightly more dynamic 3D photo like the one you see right now. It's not too hard to do, and I know that there are some apps that can do this a lot easier, but I'm going to show you how to do it inside of DaVinci Resolve using the Fusion page. Now, some of the things you see on here, obviously I have some light leaks applied, I have a little bit of a film grain put in here as well, but the basic concepts that I'm going to be showing you are very applicable to other things outside of this specific technique. Really quickly, let me go ahead and show you what my fusion composition here looks like, and I'll give you just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to cut the foreground from the background. And you can see that's actually done over here with these masks. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to recreate a background and fill in all of the spots that we've cut out, cutting out that foreground element. And then we're going to take the two elements and we're going to put them on 3D cards, and we're going to place them in a 3D environment. We're going to create a camera, and we're going to place both of those cards inside of 3D space, and I'm going to show you how, with just a little bit of camera movement, you can create that nice parallax effect. And then we're going to put it all back into the 2D environment, and then you're going to be able to add in some things like lens flare, color correction, film grain, maybe some light leaks, stuff like that, to just really spice it up a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump back over to the edit page, and let's do this all from scratch. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a fusion composition and I'm just going to put it over here somewhere, and I'm going to jump right over to that fusion comp. Now you'll notice there's nothing inside of the fusion comp, so we're going to go ahead and place something into the fusion comp. I'm going to go ahead and bring my photo out. Now this is just a JPEG that I found on Pixabay. So if we take a look at what that JPEG is, it's kind of like an engagement photo, or maybe you're a photographer and you want to just spice up one of your photos, maybe either to put on your website or maybe even give it to your client. So the first thing we need to do is we need to turn this into two separate layers. And in order to do that, I'm actually only going to work on one layer at a time. I'm going to get rid of the media pool for right now. And I'm just going to give myself a little bit more space just by grabbing right here, right above this timeline, and dragging it down a little. So I need to create some masks. The goal is to just mask around this foreground, which is going to be my two clients that are in this scene, and I want to separate them from this outdoor scenery. So with that media selected, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit this little polygon mask tool. Now by default, you'll notice that everything goes away, and that's because I haven't started masking. So to see it better, I'm going to go ahead and click on the little invert over here on the right side of the inspector, and now I can actually see what I'm doing. This is the part where I would say you need to spend pretty much most of your time making sure that your mask is exactly what you want it to be. Of course, I could always just come in here and I could really quickly just do a mask, and you would kind of get the idea. Let me go ahead and uncheck invert, and now I could go ahead and show you the technique doing this, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to do this, I'm going to speed it up, but I'm going to take my time making sure that the mask is actually pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead again with this selected, come back over here, re-invert this, and I'm going to zoom in, holding down the control and just using my mouse wheel to scroll in. And I want this to be really close, and it doesn't matter how many points it has because I'm not going to be animating these points. So I'm going to go ahead and start off screen, and I'm just going to work up maybe this pant seam, and I'm just going to slowly start to move around here. Now, of course, you could also use a Wacom tablet or some other kind of pressurized pen tablet. I'm just going to use the mouse for this, and I'm just going to make sure all of my points are exactly where I want them to be. Now, I'm going to speed this up, but essentially as close to the detail as you possibly can get, the better your mask is going to be. All right, so once you've gotten to the point where you've pretty much made a very large selection all around the outline, go ahead and connect these up. Once you connect these up, you'll notice that it takes out everything that is within that foreground element. Just come back over here to the inspector, go ahead and click off invert, and now you see that you've separated them from the background. But not completely, right? Because we do have some holes here where this is the background, and the background is in between these two subjects. So we need to remove it. And you can also see there's a little bit of background over here. So it's pretty easy to remove something within a mask. And this is the technique of just a mask within a mask, and it's real simple. So over here where the masks are, I actually just want to have the original mask selected, and I just want to create another mask. Now I'm going to go ahead and start down here, and I'm going to just make a selection on the part that I want to cut out from my other mask. And it's essentially the exact same process. I go ahead and I've cut that out completely. And now in this polygon here, I want to come over here to where it says merge. It's the paint mode. I want to left click on that and I want to change it to subtract. What that's going to do is that's going to subtract this mask from every mask that's above it. So it's essentially cutting a hole out of that mask. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, but at this time I'm going to do it up here and cut out this big section right here. With this mask selected, I'm going to go ahead and click on yet another mask, and I'm just going to start here down at the bottom. All right, and now that that mask has been completed, I'm going to come back over to this polygon again, and I'm going to change the paint mode to subtract. Cool. There we go. Now we have effectively separated this foreground from the background. So we can't actually see anything other than the one that we actually masked. So now we have to create the background. And creating the background, there's tons of different ways that we could have separated the foreground from the background. So don't feel like you have to do masking. You could also try to use some kind of selective coloring. You can use some kind of contrasting, keying techniques. There's a lot of different techniques we could have used. This is the one that's probably going to give you the best result, unless you have a drastic difference in contrast or color between your foreground and background. So I'm just going to select that entire selection there, and I'm going to hit Command or Control C to copy it, and then I'm going to click off of it, Command or Control V to paste another version of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at this version. It looks the exact same, and it is the exact same, but inside of the media node, which is essentially just the original photo, we're going to come over here to the inspector. And in the inspector, you'll see there's an image and then there's a settings tab. Let's go ahead and click over on the settings tab where it says apply mask inverted. I'm just going to go ahead and check that little box, and now you see we get the exact opposite of the image that we just had. And this is just letting us know what has been removed. This is essentially just the background, right? But it's not good enough, because if I took this and I put them on top of each other, it'll just look like the same image. But when I move the camera even just a little bit, you'll notice that there'd be a big hole here. And so the next step will be to fill in this hole using parts of the background. And there's a bunch of different ways we can do this as well. In fact, you could take this into Photoshop. You could do some content-aware fill, which a lot of other tutorials will tell you to do. But I'm assuming that you don't have Photoshop, otherwise you probably wouldn't be doing it this way. And there are other content-aware fills that you could use either inside the color tab or anywhere else. But to be honest, I don't think that those content-aware fills really do a very good job. So let's go ahead and prep it for some clone stamping. I'm actually just going to move this off to the side, because eventually, once I get this clean plate in the back, I'm not going to use this series of polygons and nodes. I'm actually just going to take a snapshot of that clean plate, and then I'm going to put that back in here. And I'll show you, that might not make sense at the moment, but it'll make perfect sense here in just a little bit. So after the media, we're going to go ahead and we're going to use a paint node. So with the paint node selected, I'm going to go ahead and load this paint node maybe over here to the right. And over here in the paint, so generally we want it to last longer than one stroke. So I'm just going to turn it up to 30. If I was going to use this part of it, I want to make sure that it would go all the way past 115. Maybe I would actually just come over here and just type in, I don't know, 1,000. It doesn't really matter how high it is, as long as it's longer than you're going to need for the amount of frames. But since we're actually only going to use like one little snapshot, it's not really a big deal. So I'm going to come over to the brush controls. I'm going to hit this soft brush, but then I'm going to turn the softness down just a little bit. I'm going to turn the size up quite a bit. And over in apply mode, I'm going to hit clone, because I don't want to just color something. I don't just want to paint it. Although sometimes that is not a bad method. You might want to come through and just maybe grab like a color. So if we grabbed a color from maybe here, I could come in here and I could at least paint this, so that so no matter what I do, it would at least have the same color as that. That is one option you could use, but in this, I'm actually going to be using a clone stamp, and so we'll see a little bit what that's going to do. So I'm going to turn this brush up just a little bit larger, and now to use the clone brush, you have to use the Alt key somewhere over where you want to start cloning from, and you're just going to clone all of this back into it. So let's go ahead and grab maybe something over here. I hold down Alt and then I click, and you'll notice that little X stays there. And now I can come over on this side and I can just start cloning all of this out. And you'll notice that it does a pretty good job because it's soft enough to where whatever's in the center of this brush is going to be pretty much what you see over here, but then the edges are going to be a little softer. And so you can grab something maybe from over here, again, hold down Alt, and then let's go ahead and maybe we'll clone out some of this. See, so one of the problems you'll run into though is that you'll get a patterning over here. And so sometimes you're going to need to grab maybe a little bit more. And you also have to be careful because if you go too far, you're going to actually start reintroducing some of this stuff. So let's maybe do over here, and then let's try and match it up so that it makes a little bit of sense here. And let's go ahead and take some of that. Let's maybe bring back some of this tree. Maybe bring back some of this tree here over here. And then, you know, we just want to like create a scene rather than trying to just have something filling that spot, right? And sometimes you have to be careful because if you go too crazy with this, then you'll get something that doesn't look realistic. And even though people don't necessarily know what's wrong with it, they'll know that it doesn't look right. And so what I like to do is I like to just kind of come through here. I like to recreate this horizon line maybe a little bit. You know, once you create the horizon, it's just a matter of filling in spots, making sure that there's something everywhere. Maybe I'll even put a tree here, you know, and have it come all the way up here. And it's really this tree over here, but we've added it in over here. So if there's a very specific background like the Space Needle or some type of city that you wouldn't be able to recreate, then this method might not be as good because you would actually need that other background. So in that case, I would recommend doing this in 2 stages. If you plan to shoot a 3D photo, put it on a tripod, shoot the background first, and then have your models move in and then shoot that again, because then you'll actually have a realistic background that would have been behind them. And so it'll be a lot easier to make a clean plate because you'll have one already set for you. But we don't have that today. We actually only have this one photo. And so we're going to go ahead and do what we can with what we got. One thing that's nice to do is sometimes take a background and go ahead and color this background, maybe something that is really stand out. And then that way you can see if you've missed any spots. And you can see down here, we have actually missed some spots. There's a little bit of red peeking through in certain areas. So what we would need to do is we need to come through here and go back into the paint node. And then let's just go ahead and touch up some of these spots just so everything is covered. Because what we don't want to have is a little bit of light leaking through. If we can help it, we would rather not have that. So sometimes you have to go a little bit further over because you start reintroducing artifacts that from the original. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and delete that. Take this paint again, and now that this is completed, rather than just using it as is, because sometimes you can have some artifacting the paint node isn't always perfect because sometimes it does get a little bit bugged, or you accidentally maybe move a cursor over and you don't realize that it's moved in a frame or two off, and then you're having all kinds of trouble. So what I like to do just to make it real easy is I'll just right click on the finished image that I want, and I go ahead and save this image. I'm just going to put it on my desktop, and I'm just going to call it BG Test JPEG. It already exists. I'm just going to replace it with this one. And then now when I come over to the media pool, you see I already have this here, but I would just load this into my media pool. And now when I bring this down, we can take a look at it next to this one over here, and they are essentially the exact same image, right? They're the same image, and they're essentially the same quality. So this is just one of those little hacks that instead of this processing all of these polygon masks and this new media and then going through a paint node, we can simply just delete all this. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and delete all this. And now we can just use this specific media as our background. And I can name it as such. I can come over here and just name it BG just by hitting F2 on my keyboard. I can leave this one as it is, or I could even come in and I could do the exact same thing. I could port this out and then give it a mask. I would have to bring it in as an alpha. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave this one as is, and I'm just going to show you the rest of the technique doing it this way. All right, so that's the first step. We've taken these two and we've separated them. So on one side we have the foreground, on the other side we have the background. And we know that these two are going to match up pretty well because they came from the exact same background. So now it's just a matter of if I was to take this foreground and I place it on top of this background and it brings in a merge node, we'll see that this essentially is the exact same photo that we started with. The only difference is now they're on different layers. And by layers, I mean that they've been separated from each other. All right, but we're not going to really use the merge like that. So what we are going to do is we are now going to take these two different cards and we're going to convert them into 3D. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a 3D scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in two image planes. So I'm going to go ahead and click that twice. You'll know that it already set it up with a merge 3D node. I'm going to need a couple more things. I'm going to need a camera and I'm going to need a renderer. So the 3D renderer is what's going to allow me to render this back into a 2D comp. So let's go ahead and take a look at this merge 3D here over on the left. We can see that everything comes in at the exact same spot. It all comes in at the world origin. And so we don't really see much. I'm going to take this renderer 3D and I'm just going to throw it over here on the right. And you notice that it doesn't see anything. And it doesn't see anything because the camera is right there in the middle. But if I go ahead and click on this camera, and then I push this camera back in Z-Space, you'll see now that I see the card. So that card, that's pretty cool, but let's go ahead and let's take one of our images. Let's go ahead and take the background first, and I'm going to put the background on this image right here. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to pipe it directly into that, and you'll notice that now it's there. The problem is that it's also intersecting some other geometry, which is in this instance, it is that other card. Let's go ahead and take this texture, which is now our media or our foreground image, and we're going to put this in the other 3D card. They both look, you know, they're essentially kind of covered up with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the background, and I'm going to push the background back a bit. And now you can see kind of what we have going on here. Now, one thing that I want to do is I want to move this camera back. And so I'm going to just use the camera distance from my subjects to frame my actual subjects in my camera. Okay, so let's say that we're happy with this framing. And now I'm just going to bring it up a little bit because I want to have a little bit of headroom. So maybe right about here, I still want them to be in the center, but this is how I want it framed up. So now I'm going to move everything else around, but leaving this as it is. I am going to drop a target down for this camera because when I start doing my camera movements, I want these guys to stay pretty much in the center of the actual camera. So to do that, I'm going to come over to the camera and I'm going to select it down here in the node panel. And then I'm going to come over to the transform, and right here where it says pivot, I want to use target. So I'm going to go check that box and it drops a target right there. And I want to move that target up a little bit. And I can see right here that Y is the up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and just move it a little bit just so I can really see it. Because sometimes when you try to grab these handles, you accidentally end up grabbing something that you don't want to grab and it starts moving it around. So I'm going to just reposition this to give them just a little bit of headroom and then maybe something like that. And now it will stay on them. But then I also want to push it back a little bit because I don't necessarily want that to be the focus, because when I start moving this around, I want there to be a little bit of parallax. Now we can see the distance from the foreground to the background. It's not a whole lot. We could try to recreate this scene as best we could. We could even put the trees back in the amount of Z-space that we think that they would be comparatively to our subjects. But the problem with that would be that we would never really be able to get that correct unless we were actually at the scene and we measured out those distances. So we can kind of just guesstimate where we want it to be. And then we can also play with it later, depending on the amount of parallax that we're getting. And if it's too much parallax and it's moving too quickly and it almost pulls you from the realism, simply move it closer. So in this instance, I'm just going to move this back a little bit further in Z-space, maybe something like that, because I don't need too much crazy parallax. But then I will notice that obviously as we look through the camera that the size difference is drastically different, right? So let's go ahead and let's come into the transform, and we need to scale it up. You'll see that there is a scale right here. All I have to do is simply scale this up a bit. And now we can see that we have a pretty good background on our pretty good foreground. Where we're going to run into problems now is I'm going to go ahead and orbit around a little bit here. So I'm going to start moving this camera. As I move this camera around, you'll see that we'll eventually start to get to the edges of this. And so you're going to want to figure out what your movement's going to be, and then you're going to want to either size up your background or even extend your background using any number of ways to extend. We could tile it. We could actually make the background bigger. We could make another background, and we could even have it a little bit further back. There's any number of ways that we could do this, but the simplest way is to just make the background a little bit bigger. Now, if you can't make the background a little bit bigger because something in your background, it would be too obvious if you made the background a little bit bigger, then you're going to have to probably figure out just another. And a lot of this is just, doing some slight problem solving. But in my case, it's real easy for me just to make the background just slightly larger. And so now when I start my camera movement at 0 here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to maybe make some kind of dollying and some kind of panning movement. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to start keyframing this. But right now I'm selected on the image plane. So if I was to keyframe these things over here in the inspector, nothing will happen. So let's click back on the camera. We can see the things that have moved. And I'm just going to select all of these things here. And now I'm just going to come to the very end of my clip here. I'm going to push this in just a little bit because I want a little bit of like a dynamic zoom movement. And then I'm also going to move this over a bit, maybe something like that. And it doesn't have to be a crazy amount of movement. Even the smallest amount of movement will give you some parallax. And sometimes you'll get too much parallax if you're moving too far in the camera. So with the camera selected, I can come up here to the spline, and I can go ahead and select this. Come over here and then fit all of these to zoom. Now I can see kind of what my camera, the actual movements are. They're very linear, right? They're very linear. So let me go ahead and I'll just kind of scroll out a little bit. I can select all of these, and if I want to just ease them in, and if I want to smooth them easily, all I got to do is click this, and that will smooth them. It isn't necessarily easing them because it really depends on how much movement you have, but for most instances, it will give you somewhat of an easing effect. All right, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and click out of that. Let's just go ahead and I'm going to take this render 3D and I'm going to merge it with this background. Let me just, I'm going to take this foreground and I'm going to place it on this background, and that gives me a merge. We'll just go ahead and bring this merge down a little bit. And then just for the sake of testing it, I'm just going to take this merge and I'm going to put it into the media out. And then I'm going to let this cache for a little bit because I want to see realistically how the movement looks and if it's smooth enough, and then I can start moving on to the finishing touches. So that only took like a couple seconds to let buffer. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. And we're noticing that we're getting some crazy artifacting from this, which is really interesting because we shouldn't be getting any artifacting because of the way that we did this. So let's take a look at what is giving us this artifacting. Let's go ahead and take this one up here and we'll go ahead and run this through. Okay, I don't see anything there. Let's take this background and we'll run it through. Okay, for some reason it's in the background. So let me go ahead and delete this, and let me go back out and take a look at this BG test. All right, so this BG test doesn't have any issues, so let's jump back in here. Let's go back into this media pool, grab this BG test. Let's take a look at just the BG test by itself. So no issues there. Now let's go ahead and replug it back in. All right, and now it seems to have cleaned up. So I think that what might have happened was there was a little bit of cache left over from the way that we originally had it, and so for some reason it was conflicting with what we had it in there. So it's real weird. But now that that's kind of fixed, and that's what a lot of working in Fusion is, right? It's a lot of just problem solving, see what is wrong, why is it flickering, and you'll get a lot of flickers. And so sometimes you have to just kind of work through the problem, remove some things, input some things, maybe copy save, move into a new composition, and then try to figure out where the problem actually lies. Here we can see it looks pretty good. I'm happy with the movement. I'm happy pretty much with all of that. Let's just go ahead and let's add a few things just to give it a little bit of a finishing touch here. One thing I didn't really touch on in the original demo is there are some things that you can do. You can, I can bring in a 3D card. I could throw some text on there. I can also just bring in some 3D text. Let's say that you want some 3D text in here. You could call this maybe kiss. Let's go ahead and we can just size it down a little bit. You'll see that right now it's intersecting, but if we actually look at where it's located, let me go ahead and just orbit around here a little bit. let's go ahead and take this 3D text and let's say we move it back here. Maybe even I size it up just a little bit. Right, you could do something like this where, you know, you want to put something behind them, but you still want to have it, you know, it's not like a free mask because you actually created the mask. So you could have done this without doing all of this. But now the difference is you have the added element of you have 3D text inside your 3D environment that is also moving in conjunction with your camera, right? So it's just an option. I'm not going to do it in this specific one, but you know, if that's something that you're into, or you just want to put, you know, something to spice up whatever video you're making, you know, feel free to do so. All right, so I'm going to use just a couple elements. One of the first things that I'm going to bring in is I'm just going to bring in some grain. So I'm just going to type in Shift Space to bring up this quick tool select. I'm going to bring in any different type of the grain. Not all of these grains I think are available in the free version, so pick whichever version is available in the free version. In this specific instance, I'm going to go ahead and use film grain. We'll see by default it's way too heavy. Let's go ahead and take a look at how thick that looks. But if I start to turn down the strength quite a bit, you can turn it up just a little bit, you know, like in video. Granted, this was a photo, but in video, you know, you should expect to see some grain. It's also going to help tie the rest of your components together. In addition to the grain, I'm also going to bring in maybe a light leak, and I'll have this play somewhere in the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop this right on top. Now, by default, you can see if I press play, you'll see what it is, what it's doing. It's just a light leak. It's on a black background. It's a video element. So what I need to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change the apply mode from normal, which means that everything is just going to apply normally on top of everything that I already have here, my background. And I'm just going to screen it on here. Now, by default, it's a little bit maybe too strong, right? So what I would probably do is I would come into this merge node and I would just blend this down, maybe like 50%. And it only really flickers in the very beginning. So that's just another element. I also have some puffy smoke here. If I wanted to add some smoke, some atmosphere, some embers, I have all of that, you know, right at my disposal. You could do all of that if you wish. One of the things I did in the other one was I went into the effects library, went into templates, and over into the Fusion side, or you can actually see there's a section on lens flares. One thing that's kind of nice sometimes is to just take some lens flares and just drop it in. You can see, let me go ahead and get rid of this other viewer real quick, and then let's just drop a lens flare down here. Okay, so the funny thing about lens flare is it needs some kind of background. So just grab like a black background and just drag it into this, and then you'll have your lens flare, and then just make sure in the merge node that you have it screening on, because if it's normal, you're just going to see the black layer. You can also come into the background. You can just take this alpha and drop it down, and it's essentially the same thing. Or pretty close to the same thing. You just notice that if I hit screen, it just changes it ever so slightly, but really it's just removing any of the black, and it's only letting the brightest parts, or what's greater than 50% brightness actually show up in your actual final video. So with this lens flare selected, I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'm probably going to put it outside of screen, and I'm going to start it over here, and then you'll see the primary center here. If you select the keyframe over here and then come to the end of the video, you can just slightly move this around, and that's just going to give it the effect that like it's moving along with the camera movement. And so now when we come out here, and you can dial this down if that's too strong, let's just go ahead and really quickly just let it cache, and then we'll see what that looks like. All right, it's fully cached, only took a few seconds, and we'll see, we can kind of see that lens flare. Maybe the lens flare is a little bit strong, but you know, feel free to tailor it back. You can also blur the lens flare. In fact, in the lens flare itself, pretty much changing just about everything. And you play with all of the different lens flares. There's tons of them in here. Like there's so many lens flares in here, you should never be able to not find the right lens flare that you're looking for. And of course, you can use particles and shaders and all kinds of other different things. You can have, there's tons of different options in here. You can use a lot of third-party programs as well, but this is pretty much the effect in its entirety. Feel free to use it however you guys like. I'd love to see whatever you guys come up with. If you guys are wedding photographers or just photographers in general, are you even using this type of technique in some of your promo videos? If you are, that's awesome. If you're not, is this helpful? It is a little bit of work, and there's a lot of things that I didn't really talk about when it comes to masking, like even getting in here and masking some of those individual hairs. You can also use a paint mask in order to maybe like more closely get in there and do as much work as possible. But I totally understand that when you guys are working on a project, speed is of the necessity. So to be able to do it quickly, this is probably one of the faster ways to be working. Just, quickly get in there, mask. You're probably only doing 1 or 2 of these photos. So that's pretty much it for me. I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you guys are able to use this in your own projects. If you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.